Recording for the webinar. So thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to the webinar. I will, without further ado, get started. Just a very quick piece of housekeeping. We do record the webinar, so that's started now. Anyone who has registered will receive an email with a copy of a link to the video and the slides as well. So don't worry too much about links. If you want to grab them, you should have access to the slides later on. Closed captioning is enabled, so if you would like to use that, you should be able to turn that on. We can do a Q&A at the end, but do add questions through the webinar if something comes to mind. If I spot them while I'm talking and it's relevant, then I can try to address them then. Don't always spot them when I'm in full flow, but feel free to add them, and if not, at the end we can answer. And then just links here. There are other webinars, but also if you are using protocols.io and would like a more tailored session with one of the team to show you how to do something specific or to just go over something again, you can sign up for a demo. So feel free to use those resources. And a quick agenda here. I'll do a bit of scene setting, why sharing methods matters. Then I will do an intro into protocols.io, the mission, the key functionality, and then kind of a bit of a tour of some of the most of the basic functionality in there, how to use it, how to search for things on there, how to publish, and also the entry service that we have. And then we should have time for Q&A. So we'll get started at the very beginning, why sharing methods matters. Unfortunately, due to inconsistent practices in different labs, different ways of storing information, and maybe just busy schedules, what happens is that often methods are lost. So these tweets are examples in the past. They're actually quite old, but there's a whole thread of these somewhere where we capture when researchers have been unable to find methods from published research papers. So on the left there, biologist clearly quite irritated, has gone down a citation chain from one paper to another paper, eventually hits a paywall. Maybe it's a paper only. If it's gone back in time far enough, might not even be able to find it online, depending what it is. Might be impossible to get to the original paper and the full details of the methods. In the middle there, it's a physicist, same exact problem, citation chain back to a 2009 paper in which it tells you that devices were fabricated with conventional methods. So that is not helpful and means that researchers often can't find, access, or replicate the experimental methodological details in something that's published. So we think we know how to do something, we've published a paper about it, but when you come back to them over time, maybe you actually can't replicate. There's a very interesting project that was carried out in the last 10 years. This goes back, I think it started probably 2014 and ran through a few years. This was the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project. The goal was to take 50 published, perceived, high impact, important papers around cancer biology and see if it was possible to replicate the results, to reproduce and perform again the experiments that were in those papers. There's a really nice write-up about this in The Atlantic, and I've just got an excerpt from that here. So the hardest part by far was figuring out exactly what the original labs actually did. Papers come with method sections, should have recipes for doing the same experiments, but often those recipes are incomplete, missing out important steps, details, or ingredients. In some cases, the recipes aren't described at all. So we have a problem. We have perceived really important research about cancer biology in the papers, but we can't actually replicate or figure out what happened in those papers. So that initiative was stopped after they tried to replicate just 18 of the papers. It was supposed to be 50, but it was too time and money expensive, basically impossible to repeat and replicate what was done in those papers. In a more recent write-up, this was performed by the Centre for Open Science with Science Exchange. On the Centre for Open Science website, there's a more recent write-up when preparing replications of 193 experiments from 53 papers. There were a number of challenges, one of which being that 0% of the protocols were completely described. Clearly, we are not going to be able to repeat things if we don't have the information. And methods really do matter. People Probably you're all familiar with sharing your data these days. That's become much more commonplace. We expect data management plans as part of research grants. There are many repositories where you can put data depending on the kind of data. But if you're generating a lot of data, and share it, and come back to that a few years down the line, and you don't have the information about the methods, they're actually much more limited use. You don't really know how they were produced. So how can you kind of interpret or build upon analyses if you don't know what the methods were? So I always like my virtual cookie slide. These were baked using the same recipe, but with tiny tweaks to the recipe. We can see some of them look a lot nicer than others. Phenotypically, they're all very different to one another. But if I really like this cookie and I want to replicate that, I can only do that if I've kept track and I know exactly what method was used, which recipe tweak was used when that cookie was baked. So if the cookies are your data and your results, you can actually only analyze and interpret if you know what happened in the method. So I always quite like that analogy. Especially actually sometimes when it's not scientific people, I think it helps people to clock what we're talking about. All right, we'll jump into protocols.io now. So our mission is fairly simple. We want to make it easy to share method details before, during, and after publication. So it is an online tool and platform. When you make things publicly available, they are open access. If you choose to publish, you will have a DOI, which is the same kind of identifier that you get when you publish a research paper. And everything is always Creative Commons licensed CC BY. So it's available for others to use, reuse, etc. So on the one side, protocols.io is a lovely repository of open access methods that others can use. So if you are not familiar, I'll show you how you can search for content on there. On the other side is where you can add your own content, collaborate with your colleagues, develop and optimize the protocols on the platform. This is just kind of the landing page that we have, this protocols.io/welcome. That is a really good page to come and poke around if you've never looked at it. It's also a place where, you can't see on here, but on the top right, there's a place to sign in or sign up if you haven't got an account yet. If folk are familiar with the FAIR acronym that pops up a lot, oops, jumping around, it really achieves that. So FAIR is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Protocols.io really achieves all of those 4 elements, meaning that in an open research capacity, it really fulfills the goals of making this piece of research output fully fair and available to everybody else. It's very versatile across research disciplines. It was built initially with wet lab research in mind, but we see it used by all different research disciplines these days. And you can see from the stats, and these were updated actually more or less this morning, about 200,000 users. We're getting on close to 20,000 public protocols, but this is rapidly growing lately, and a bit over 80,000 private protocols, and this tracks always about 1 to 4. So that ratio of public to private tracks fairly consistently over time. And this is people who are using it for that internal sharing, collaboration, development, etc. that I mentioned. And there were a lot of views, and this kind of over 2.5 million views in 2023, or the average views per month. That is users finding protocols on protocols.io from using Google or because it's indexed in quite a few places. So there's a lot of real organic visibility and discoverability of content if you publish your protocols on protocols.io. So it is a tool that fits into the entire research workflow. I think people know of it as a place to publish a protocol. What's less appreciated perhaps is the ability to use it in that private capacity as somewhere that, if you bed it into the research workflow, can really mean you make efficiencies with your time and efforts. And I think the more you use it and collaborate on it, the greater the efficiencies are. So if you start thinking about a new research question, you might be outlining, what you're going to do, thinking about it, and starting to plan the methods and the experiments and the approach. You may be able to identify protocols on the platform already that you can kind of create your own versions of, or maybe it's your own earlier content. can do this, and you can start to build up a library of the equipment and materials and things that you're using on protocols.io. Throughout this whole time, you can be doing this in a shared way, collaboratively with colleagues in a workspace, and you can be seeking and getting feedback with the comment functionality that we have on the platform. You can run the methods on protocols.io too. I think that also is slightly less visible. It's the ability to make a run of a protocol and store a run record. So if you make tiny tweaks and changes to the protocols, and you can iterate around on this, you can capture every change you make. So perhaps you want to try just moderating the variables, a temperature, a quantity, just something, try something a bit different to see if you can optimize and get the protocol to work better. This can all happen on protocols.io. So we can record every run with the comments and the details of what's working, what doesn't work, tweak it and try again. And you'll have these date time-stamped records that will correlate with any results you've generated on that day. So it's a really nice way of kind of tracking back. Maybe you're taking microscope images and they look really good one day, but you can't remember exactly what you did. If you have that run record, you have a really nice way of tracking back to see what you did that day. Hopefully, eventually, you do get experiments to work and you're good to go. You've got something that's robust, repeatable in your own hands, and you've got nice replicates and you're ready to publish. At that point, it's really easy to post publicly that protocol on protocols.io. So you've got your successful final protocol. You can click through publish and obtain a DOI. You can put that DOI, that's this link that papers get to, into the materials and methods section of a research paper. So you've basically written the comprehensive materials and methods if you've put the protocol on protocols.io and used it throughout the process. So that's a big efficiency. And then in your paper, you'll have your 2 sentences of we did these experiments, but you don't need to go into all the detail, but you can point to protocols.io for the comprehensive details. So there are many benefits to using the platform for managing, sharing research data protocols. The collaborative aspect is really important too. It's a great way to have centralized content for everyone in that lab or that group, that collaboration. You can have everyone in that place with access to all of those protocols. And it really can save time and help keep work organized. I know sometimes it feels like it's a lot to be doing something like this on top of everything you already do. This is an investment of time, which pays off if you do use it a lot. Then yes, what about streamlining publishing? That part of being able to put that link in, this is just quite a nice tweet that was on, I guess we're calling it X now, or I guess predating slightly everybody dropping off X. What if labs publish each of their unique methods and protocols in bioRxiv preprint, and in future papers, instead of rewriting the protocols, we just cite them? Waste so much time on methods by saying the same thing but differently. It's not just a plagiarism. And so somebody replied, well, why not actually just put them on protocols.io and insert direct links to the protocol page? That's exactly what you can do. So someone sort of conceived the idea of protocols.io as a preprint. Really, protocols.io is equivalent to a preprint server, but for these methods. But the beauty is that, I'll show you in a minute, you have this step-by-step method. It's much more suited to capturing a method that has a series of instructions in. So when you're putting it into a paper, what does that actually look like? This is a published PLOS biology paper from a few years back. And in that paper, in the materials and methods section, they say methods and protocols for, and then they have a bunch of different experiments, are available as a collection in protocols.io. And then they have that live link, the DOI that I talked about. And if you click through from that, it brings you to that collection on protocols.io. Another feature is that authors can update the protocols or the collection after publishing them. So you can make a new version. Maybe something needs to be clarified. Maybe you further optimized. The link on protocols.io will always come to the version that was published at that time, but you will always be alerted if there's a newer version. So really, I call this dynamic permanence, because we have that link across see the question, how long can we assume that a protocol will be available on protocols.io should be greater than 10 years? If you have published it, it will be available forever. As long as protocols.io is up, obviously it will be there, but we also archive to many different places. So there are lots of places where it is available. And in exactly the same way as journals subscribe to kind of additional archive locations where should a journal or a publisher go bust, there will be a location where all of the content will be put up. We have exactly the same kind of belt and braces approach. So there's an entity called clocks, controlled lots of copies, keeps stuff safe. It's got a double S at the end. And most journal publishers use that, and we use that for protocols.io too. If you've published it, it will be available for free. If you're keeping it privately, I mean, it's there for as long as you have your account. We do archive the private stuff that too. Trans-Zuckerberg Initiative has set up a code escrow agreement with us. They used to fund us before we were acquired by Springer Nature. So they keep our code, and they also have a dynamic archive that's maintained now of everything that's on protocols.io. So in theory, it will always be there. Who knows? Never say never, but that is set up to always persist, essentially. So back to that slide too, sorry, the view the newer version will bring you to the most recent version. And if you want, there are ways to do a comparison to see what's updated, the newer version to the older version always. And we have links with many, many journals and publishers. Often if you poke around, look at the instructions to authors, you will find that there is a recommendation to put a link into protocols.io. All the Wiley journals, obviously all the Springer Nature journals, PLOS journals, eLife, many have that. But also when you're using protocols.io, if you're viewing a protocol that you've not yet published, well, first you can see all the very easy buttons to press when you want to publish it. But there are also these slightly more detailed partnerships that we have with quite a few journals, and this is growing all the time. So Gigabyte, we just added in the last couple of weeks, so that one's flagging as new. And they have different kind of formats, but they're really strongly encouraging sharing the method on protocols.io. If it's peer-reviewed, the method on protocols.io with the paper, then we can reflect that with a peer-reviewed badge too. So if the peer-reviewed badge isn't there, we don't know if it's been reviewed, but for these journal partnerships, we can add that to reflect that the method has been reviewed with the paper. PLOS One Lab Protocol is an extra special one because they require that the protocol be on protocols.io. So that's an actual kind of part of that format. So this is what one of those journal articles look like. They created this specific lab protocol article type. When you view it on PLOS One, has a very prominent see the protocol button. And in the materials and methods, you see that link through. And then if you land on it, if you click through to see the protocol on protocols.io, you can see the journal very prominently, and that is a bidirectional link, and you can see its peer-reviewed method here. Do you have any info using protocols.io in DMP to define methodology? So the DMP tool that's created by CDL has a space in it for a linked protocol on protocols.io. In other places, any other DMP kind of place where you're writing up your data management plan, you can very easily link through to methods on protocols.io. If you're not ready to make it public, but you want to say we've got the start of a method on protocols.io, there is this reserved DOI feature, but you can also generate a private link. So if you want to give people access to something privately, you can do that very easily too. That's obviously less certain for persistence, depends what you do with it subsequently, but you can use that functionality. Okay, so lab protocols in PLOS One. And then, you know, another benefit here is increased discoverability, the reuse and the value. So this was a tweet in 2017, going back now, it's a researcher in Chile who was looking for RNA extraction, very specific protocol, and they're working with primary cortical neuron cultures, so kind of brain cell. Can anybody help? A few tweets later, there was a postdoc from UCSF, and she'd said, pointed to this basic trisal protocol, you'll just need to make some adjustments, and linked to this RNA extraction protocol. When you look at that RNA extraction protocol, it came from a paper that was published on GigaScience, but it's a method that's in this paper that's actually working on 3-spine stickleback parasite, so a fish parasite. So I think it's pretty unlikely that these brain cell researchers would have found this method just from the paper. So the beauty of having the method as a standalone output means it's discoverable independently. So that's that 3-spine stickleback parasite. And then you click through, but sure enough, oops, it's an RNA extraction protocol. It's exactly what these researchers were looking for. The implementation to something different is sort of immaterial. So we have now got this lovely separate research output. That's the method. So you see the modularity and the benefits of that very easily. And it's a huge enhancement to the value of the research actually that's being done. I can see a question about APIs and ELNs. I'll come to that in a minute. So I'll sort of answer it as we go through. Okay, agenda, navigating protocols.io. So I mentioned that it's a public repository. You can come along to this welcome page and there's a search bar there. So you can put in your term of interest. So, I mean, I've just put in PCR. It will automatically load up relevant publications. So it will find me posted publicly protocols that have that term in. If I would click on this publications, I can also toggle and select to search for people who maybe have that as a keyword, workspaces that perhaps have that in their description, etc., etc. So you can really see what's up on here. Can we revise the protocol after publication? You can make new versions. If you've got a DOI, you can't edit that once you have the DOI and it's fully published. If you reserve a DOI because you want to keep it private until a paper is published, you can revise it and make changes to it until you fully publish and the DOI is live. But once you've made it public, you can make a new version and they're always linked to one another. So that collection where you landed on the page of the DOI that was published when the paper was published, they subsequently made a new version. They'd updated at least one of the protocols in there. So you can do that way. Back to the public repository part. If you find these protocols on here that are relevant for you, what you can do is make a fork of it if you want. If you need to make some slight changes, we've got something here, RNA extraction on is human lung organoids. Maybe you've got a different kind of organoid or different tissue and you want to run it on that. You can make a fork and make changes. If you fork a public protocol, you'll always see that it came from that other public protocol, but you can keep it private. You can make any changes that you want, and you can publish if you want to subsequently, and that link back to the previous one will always be visible. So that's that, you know, reuse and findability and everything that we have with the FAIR is really obvious on protocols.io. Also, though, maybe I just want to run this protocol and kind of keep the run record, and I can do that too without making any changes. I can just run it. Can we fork a public protocol to GitHub or GitLab? You can't fork things straight out. I mean, if you make a fork, it's in protocols.io. What you can do if you use the API is export JSON and do what you like with it at that point in time. But you can't kind of take it out of protocols, put it in GitHub or GitLab. But I think you would just want to be, the format would be better in protocols.io anyway. It's not a replacement for GitHub or GitLab. You can kind of capture computational pipelines and workflows, but if you're really coding, you probably would still want to be somewhere like that. But as I say, the API would allow you to build up an integration if you wanted, I think. Searching for public content, again, there are some publicly available workspaces that you could join if you wanted. So there's one for organoid and assembly. I'm in it, but if you found something that looked good, you would see a prominent join button on that workspace, so you could join. So it might be that you find things where there are people working in your area and you can join the workspace. If you've not signed up for an account, this is that page, that protocols.io/welcome, very, very easy. If I'm not signed in, then you can see the prominent sign up here. That will bring me here. SSO will only work if your institution has a license. Otherwise, it's not going to just automatically work for you. But you can sign up with ORCID or your Google account, or you can just make an account using whatever email works for you. From this protocols.io/institutions page, if you scroll down a bit, there is a drop down which will allow you to see if your organization has got premium access. And if they do, then if you make an account with that institutional email, it will automatically be premium. So kind of when I'm talking about premium or the free accounts, this is the differences between them. So anyone can make a basic open research free account. You are limited though to 2 private protocols. You can publish them though. So if you keep making them public, you would, make one private, one public, then you have another private one, and so on and so on. So you can do all the public things. It's very much to support open research, but we limit the private. The business model is very much to, it's exactly the same as GitHub, really, is charging for the private collaboration space. That's optional in there. And so you can upgrade just a single workspace, and then you pay per person per month in that workspace. Or the most, I think, beneficial and cost effective is the institutional license, where someone pays for that location for all the researchers to have access to the premium, and then it's unlimited private protocols, unlimited workspaces, so on. Import service, which I'll talk to you briefly about in a minute, and other things that we can do. We do consortia licenses as well. So if you're kind of a part of a consortium, sometimes a consortium will pay so that all the members can collaborate together in a common space as well. So when you're using protocols.io, there's 3 kind of views that you'll become familiar with. One is a file manager, exactly what it sounds like. It's where you'll find all the files and folders, and you can switch between workspaces if you're in more than one, and organize content, create some structure that makes sense. There's an editor, and that's where you'll be making the protocols. You can develop them, and you can work on them collaboratively. So more than one person can be like a Google Doc working and editing something at the same time. And then there's a profile for the workspace, which you saw some of those when I searched. You have the choice to make them visible and so that everyone in the world can see them, or you can keep them private too. So if you just want a lab workspace that only your team is aware of, make it invisible. There's an admin tool, so you can configure who the members are of any workspace and what permissions that they have. So whoever the administrator is for the workspace can set it up to be as accessible or not as you like, and to control or not who the members are. So this is just that file manager. You can just drag and drop files in here. So if you know you've got a smattering of Word docs that are on your laptop or distributed across the laptops of various members of your lab, you could just ask everyone to put them all in one workspace, basically. So you can drag and drop anything, or you can make some structure with folders. And if you click new, you can start creating the content in here. You can connect to apps. So there are a bunch of different drive locations: Dropbox, OneDrive, Box OSF, I think it's Google Drives too, and also one electronic lab notebook that you can push out to, which is Lab Archives. There are other electronic lab notebooks. I've got another slide in a minute where when you're in that electronic lab notebook, you can interact with the protocols on protocols.io. But so you can configure these apps, whichever ones are relevant to you, so that if you use export, you can push and pull in content depending on what you want to do. On the left are all the different workspaces. I'll get to that in just a minute. This is the profile view, kind of had a visibility of that before. We created this is a very large public workspace during the pandemic. And so it has many members, so well, probably more than this now, I haven't even looked, many publications, so protocols that were publicly posted. There's going to be an admin, as I said, you can do all of these things. But in this workspace too, it's possible to have kind of discussions and seed conversations about things happening, or if people use the commenting functionality, they also flag up in here. But you can link to resources or news, kind of, it can be a collaborative hub for more than just the methods. So if it's team or collaboration with some external people, it's just a good centralizing location. Right, so the ability to kind of toggle around all the profiles and how you actually get around in here. On the left are the links to the workspaces. I can open them out so the wee caret is quite hidden, but if you pull that out, then you can see all of the links, and I can switch between different workspaces as well if I belong to more than one. But you could does what it says on the tin. You can link to the folder, which is there, or the profile. So this is where you can kind of jump around in where you are in protocols.io. So it's pretty self-explanatory. The administration, if you've opened this out on the right and you are the administrator of the workspace, then you have this administration option where you can see there's lots of other things here that you can play around with. And again, you can't really break it. So if you make a workspace, come in, have a look, you'll see what the different things are. I won't go too detailed today because there's just not time, but there's a lot of configurability in here to set things up however you like. Just a quick view of some of it. There's advanced options. So this is where if you want to keep it private, they are always private by default. But if you want a public one for your lab where you're publishing protocols and you want to have a publicly visible space for the published protocols to all appear together, you can easily switch it to public. And you can make sure to keep it closed to people not to join. It will start out by invitation only. You can change these if you want. There's lots of things, as I say, that you can set up. I don't know how visible that is. It's quite small on my laptop screen right now, but there's a link you can generate. So if you want to invite people, like everyone in your group, you can just give them that link rather than having to put in all the email addresses, for example. Lots of things you can do in here anyway. And then the editor. So quickly talk through how you make the protocols. When you're in the file manager, there's a big new button, and that's the one to press if you want to make a protocol or a collection of protocols. There's a basic kind of document that you can create too. Has some formatting and things, not a replacement for Word, but if you want to track things and write things up in here as well, and maybe post them publicly, then you can do that using those as well. It's going to ask you where you want to create it. So you'll pick the folder or the location where you want to make the new protocol, and then it's going to give you a very bare bones entry on the editor. So I'll just talk through some of it looks like there's a lot of different toolbars. It's fairly nice how it's all configured out though. So on the left-hand side, these are all the tools for adding protocol steps, making one into a sub-step, creating sections, things like that. The new here will also allow you to add a step or a section. Along the top, there's all these tabs. In each one, there are places for different pieces of information. I'll quickly give you a glimpse of those in a minute. But if you're making something public, absolutely go through all of these. We suggest as much information as possible to make the protocol as useful as possible. There's a standard formatting toolbar. That's going to be things you're much more familiar with in general from any kind of word processing software. And then on the right, there's these additional functionality, and I'll quickly look at those in a moment, but there are additional things that we have that are specific to protocols.io within the steps more. So to those, we have detailed components. These allow you to capture variables. So we can put quantities or a duration, can link to a document, can link in a citation, allows you to search on a DOI or authors, and it will search PubMed Central, I think, when you can pull in citations, link to software or data sets if it's a computational workflow, add in notes or safety information, centrifugation. We tried to capture as many things as possible that would be relevant variables that you might want to include. And you would just highlight there, or you'd be clicked in a step and click on one and it will show you how to fill it in. It's pretty user-friendly. The concurrent editing, I'm the only one in here, so you see the little avatar, but if two people were editing it in the same way you see on other tools like Google Docs, you would see it that if there was someone else in there editing. There's ability to track history. So if you click on that, you can see all the recent changes. With a basic account, I think you get the 10 last steps and you can go back within that. If you have a premium account, you can access the entire history. If you have a basic account and something does go terribly wrong, you need to step back further, you can contact us, but it's obviously, that's a developer request if we need to do something like that. So it's not a given that it would happen in a quick time frame. Sections get made, and as you give them titles, it creates really nice color coding just for visual kind of ability to see where you are in the protocol. And that also creates a table of contents for you at the same time. When you're editing, you see that over here on a published protocol, you can see the table of contents really easily. There's completion status, which just kind of suggests all the things you should fill in for it to be a really good, useful protocol. And it just has a step-by-step format. So if you've got existing protocols, I'm just thinking I need to hurry up. If you've got existing protocols, there's various things you can do to get them in. If you're not ready to just kind of, it's not a new protocol and you've got something, as I mentioned earlier, you can just drag and drop into that workspace. The second thing you can do is create a protocol stub, like a new protocol in protocols.io, and attach a file as a document. The reason you might do that rather than just drag and drop is that you can give keywords and a title, and that way it becomes much more findable internally for you or people in your workspace. So even if you're not publishing it and you're literally pulling a Word doc that you already have into a kind of stub of a new protocol like I just showed you, it still can become much more findable with a title, maybe a brief abstract and some keywords, because then when you search your files, you'll be able to find things more easily. Can import steps from a text file. I've got a little movie bedded in a minute which shows you how that works, and then I'll get to import service a little bit later as well. So you do have a few options, and we are working on a AI aided import which will make this even better. The efforts I've seen right now look really good. But if you have made a new protocol, but you've got a Google Doc or something where you already had that protocol written out, there's a bit of a shortcut. So you can use this insert steps from text, and it will bring you through pasting it in and recognizing which line is a step, and it will pull them all into steps for you. So hopefully this little video will run. We go. And just show you how that works. So we have a bare empty one, click to insert, and I've got there a Google Doc which has the bare bones of a protocol in it, steps 1 through 16 there at the end. So we copy those out. Just do the copy and you go back into protocols.io. I tend to always do paste and match style, because if it's something from Word or somewhere, sometimes you end up with a load of extra tagging that is not going to be brought in well. You just preview and you can see you've got your 16 steps there. It's all been separated out. You can add them in. What it doesn't do is format any of the variables and things, but you can come in and add that after the fact if you want. So you could come in and use the components to pick up the quantities or timers and things like that to make it using more of the features in the platform. But it is a shortcut to doing things. So I mentioned all the different tabs that we have. So we've got steps, description, guidelines and warnings, references, materials. This just jumps through what's in there. Abstract, you will be required if you publish a protocol to put an abstract in, because they are indexed in lots of places, and this is what will then be searched. So something to contextualize the method is important in the abstract. Keywords, a link, external link if you're using something else externally. You can put the manuscript citation in here, attribution if you've used an image, funder acknowledgement, disclaimer. Sometimes we might add a disclaimer if it's something that has public health ramifications, even if you haven't. So the disclaimers can be important, and attachments here. If you want to just add, like I said earlier, you can put an attachment on a protocol. You could just do that here as well. Under the guidelines and warnings, there's a spot for specific guidelines. Before you start, that will show up at the top of the protocol, any specific warnings, safety information, etc. If you should have an ethics statement, we will make you do this if you haven't, and we see something that should have had an ethics. And it's not necessarily that you have ethics approval, it's that before someone were to perform this protocol, dissecting mice or whatever it is, then ethics approval should be obtained beforehand. And sometimes the sensitive content, if you are using the image functionality to add in images, that can be advisable if you're showing some kind of surgical procedure or something, which often does happen. Then the other two tabs, there's references, there's materials. If you use the citation component in protocols.io, then they'll all get pulled in here automatically. Similarly, if you add reagents using reagents, they'll get pulled in under materials automatically as well. To enhance what you can show in terms of instruction to make a protocol more usable, you can include images and videos really easily. So that was that basic toolbar at the top. Insert image or video using this one up here. If it's a short video from your phone or that you've just taken, you can put it in using this one. If it's a bigger, longer, larger movie, you can use embed media. So what does that mean? If you click that, it's going to give you paste your embed code. That sounds really complicated, but actually it's not. If the movie is available on a private YouTube channel, or you put it on YouTube or Vimeo or somewhere, normally there's a share button, and in that share is a embed code, embed video, and all you need to do is copy out the text that it's got here and paste that into this box. And when you do, it will pull the video in to the protocol step really nicely, very quickly. And that just means we're not kind of having to chug and have all the data on protocols.io. If it's a really large thing, it will link out to where the video is available on that other location. Right, so there was the question about ELNs and things. This is where you have that connect apps. So what you can do, you have many export options with this. So if you're in the file manager, that view where all the files and folders are, if you click on any of the protocols or on a folder, you'll see export on the right-hand side. And if you go down to PDF, you'll see to your computer or add apps. That JSON link is also here, but if you click through, that will link you to where you can find information about the API. So that doesn't work without API being configured. If you're viewing the protocol, you can get to it under here. There's a more, and down here, they export, and then you'll see the same options too. So if you click through add apps, these will all come up: Dropbox, Drive, Box, OneDrive, OSF, Lab Archives. So you can set up and configure with your account that you have in that location to push content to that other external entity. There are other electronic lab notebook integrations, as I said. So the Lab Archives one, you push things out to your Lab Archives account. However, RSpace, SciNote, and eLab Next all also have integrations, and those you do from the ELN account, and you can pull things in from protocols.io. So you can find the protocol you've run on protocols.io and pull it into your ELN account, so you've got a record of what you did there. Sharing, posting, publishing protocols, very easy. Again, when you're editing a protocol under more, you've got these options over here. If you're viewing it, they become more prominent. Actually, they're even nicer now. They've got green. I haven't updated this screenshot. There's publish, there's reserve DOI. That's the option I mentioned. You will know what the DOI will be, but you also get a private link. So if you want to keep it hidden and private until a paper is published, you can give editors and reviewers that private link, but you can already put the DOI into your manuscript. All that then you need to do is when you publish the paper, make sure that you come back and publish the protocol. We're working on automating that so you don't have to if we detect the DOI in the literature, but we don't have that fully yet. But it also means you can make changes. So if a reviewer said, what you've got a mistake in your method, you'll be able to update the protocol before you finally publish it. So there's lots of nice things there. When you're in the file manager, you also can see these on the right. So all of those options appear in multiple places, basically. And share is also very easy to use. When you click share in any of those locations, it's going to pop you up a light box where you can configure, like, share with someone by email, share with a whole workspace. Maybe you're working in your private workspace, but you want to share it with the lab. You can share to a whole other workspace as well. I mentioned the commenting earlier. So it is really nice functionality when you're developing and optimizing a protocol, and multiple of you are working on that protocol in the system. You know, the group leader PI can come in and ask questions or give feedback, or just together you can be giving one another feedback, checking. Sorry, my mouse has got a hair trigger to move at the moment. So you can come and make comments, and then when a comment's been added, you can respond to it as well. So you can go through, optimize, develop, make it better, and then clean them off. You can resolve them when they're done. If you publish the protocol, there's a chance to clear off all comments. You can keep a copy for yourself if you want, but you can clean the protocol of comments. But it's also possible to have comments on public protocols. So after publication, so this is a published, highly used protocol, anyone who comes along who has an account can, at the level of any individual step, ask a question. The authors will be alerted. So here we've got Marie asking, dear authors, something. Derek is one of the he's not an author listed on here, but I know he's a part of this team with Stephen Henikoff, has come in and answered the question. So he will be in that workspace and responding to comments that get flagged. And it's as easy as clicking plus and putting your question in to ask. Most, by default, they're public. You can ask it privately. We love when they're public because this becomes a public FAQ, because if they've asked a question, someone else might find that information really useful, the question and the answer. So you have a nice public FAQ essentially that builds up over time for these protocols. And then I mentioned earlier the import service. So this is something that's offered as a part of the extra you get if you have a license at your institution where everyone can take advantage. But also you can use it separately, but there's a fee of, well, we calculate depending on the complexity of the protocol. But what you can do here is if you have got those Word files, you can upload that file, and we have a team of editors who either are still or were previously researchers who can input the protocol using all of our functionality, really formatting it nicely, make sure there's no errors or anything. There's 2 people that do it and check, but then you get to review. So if you want something to be changed, you can ask us to revise in one round, but then when you're happy, you'll accept it and we will transfer the ownership back to you. It will be private. You can put it whichever folder you like, but then you can choose to publish or keep it private depending what you want. And so the link for that is here as well, but it's a really nice service. And so if you do use that on the protocol, your profile, which you would access from the file manager, you have your little icon and then profile. And you'll see when you're on your profile page that there's a link to protocol entry and it's under there. Oh, I thought I had more slides. Anyway, you click through there and you can track the progress of the entry that you've given, but we also email updates giving you the stage and status. But here you can also track and link to and see where it's up to if you want to track it like a journal submission system. This is a system to track the location and kind of current status of a protocol that you're entering, that we're entering for you, I should say. People use it for teaching. I'm not going to dwell on this. It's just to flag it up that if you're someone who does teach, obviously putting a protocol on protocols.io is accessible then to everybody that you want to have access to. So either for people to run through something, so you can put instructions on, or a completely classic kind of lab protocol. Computational classes, you can make datasets, software and code available through instructional protocols. This can be really useful for something like this. Many organizations, you'd probably be surprised if you start poking around, especially at journal instructions to authors, how many recommend using protocols.io. We also work though with a lot of funders, and they often have information in suggesting using protocols.io. Wellcome does actually for clinical protocols. NIH has it for their project I forget the name, that people who oversee the grants there, and many of these other funders do also. We work very closely with Aligning Science Against Parkinson's, and they require that their grantees use protocols.io. And then these institutions have institutional accounts. If that's something you're interested in for your location, you follow up afterwards with an email and we can suggest how to kind of go about exploring whether that's an option. But again, you can go in and look on that institutions page if you want to see if your location does have access already. Lots of benefits. info@protocols.io is perfect email to message if you do want more info about that though. And that's it from me. I am going to stop talking and I'm just going to put a nice key benefits slide up if people have other questions, but I can see there are a few maybe that I didn't get to. Let them have a quick look at that. I think there is also the Q&A, but I can see there are in chat. It's just, let me check what I did. So, okay, so synchronizing protocols from a lab or institute with the electronic lab. So that, hopefully I answered the question about electronic lab notebooks and also API. And if people do want to play around with the API, clicking export to JSON will give you the link, but I'm pretty sure it's protocols.io/developers will take you to the page that has information about the API as well. Did the can we revise after publication and forking? Oh, what's the difference between folder and collection? Okay, so that was on the new. So the folder is just making structure in the workspace. So you can make folders to store things in different folders. The collection is protocol format. It will still have all the things like the abstract, location, description, keywords, everything. But what you can do is pull in multiple individual protocols so that they all are put together in a nice container. So if you have 4 protocols that will go with one research paper, you can put them all into that collection and link to the DOI for the collection in the papers, materials, and methods. Every individual protocol will also have its own DOI. So they're all individually citable independently, but you can have a container just to put them all together in there like that. So that was the difference between folder and collection. And then I need to work on protocols within a consortium with Premium and in parallel on the protocols irrelevant to the consortium, which should not be covered by that. Is that possible with the same? It's perfectly possible with the same account. It depends on the type of consortium license. So some consortium set up a single workspace, in which case you would only have Premium in that workspace. I don't know if you have more information about which consortium is, or if you want to follow up with me afterwards, we can go into more specifics. Some consortia pay for equivalent of a full institutional license, in which case you can make as many workspaces as you want. There will be some that will be clearly core consortia workspaces. But if you want, this is an added benefit for you. You can make your own workspace for other things unrelated. The caveat to that, obviously, is that if they stop paying for that consortia, if it's a 3-year thing or something, when Premium goes away for the main ones, you'll lose it on the others. You could then cover that separately some other way. Sometimes people end up with multiple options for the Premium because they might have might be an institution that has it as well as also part of a consortium. But again, it will be very specific to where you are, what the consortium is. So I can't really say more without knowing more. So Sergey, if you want to follow up with an email, please do. Put to the next slide, because then my email is on there, emma@protocols.io. Next question, are there limitations in the free tier with the API? It's just like max, down, or upload? I don't think so. I don't think there's any limitations on that. If you're using the API with the free account, you can do whatever you like. So it can be a really good way of building out an integration. And just, if you've made private content, removing and then having the ability to make more. But that's obviously a bit of a churn to do something like that. But there is no limitation. Hopefully I've answered that enough. If you've got more specific questions about API integrations, Mark, afterwards, feel free to send an email and we can address them separately. And then how is it financed? That's a very good question. I should have said at the very start, on my first slide, there was a Springer Nature badge in the top right, the logo. We were acquired by Springer Nature in July 2023. So then we were very much a start-up. It's still a small team now who works on protocols.io, but we were acquired, so we are now, that small team is a part of the massive organization that is Springer Nature. Is there a European server available? That's also a really good question. So everything goes on Amazon Cloud, and I think our main location is, I want to say Ohio. I always blip on what state it is. I think it's Ohio in the States. We have worked with people in Germany before and have come across this as an issue as well. We can do virtual private clouds, and I have a feeling we can point more specifically to an Amazon server just in Germany. But again, I think we're getting into kind of weeds of details. So maybe, Mark, we can follow up specifically to better understand where you are and what the requirements would be. The virtual private cloud installations cost more, but they are an option. Typically, we've only done them for pharmaceutical companies where they're much more concerned about that data privacy and crossover. But we can explore options if that comes up. There's 5 minutes left. I don't know if anyone has any more questions. Let me stop the recording at this point. But thanks, people.